Thanks, Ralph.
Okay.
Go
Hi there, everybody. This is Alan Blumkin. I'm with David Nemec, baseball historian and writer. And today we're on Comfortably Zone Radio Network, and we're going to discuss the history of the Cincinnati Reds. This is old-time baseball history and trivia, and we hope to do a series of shows on the history of teams that are not the Yankees, Dodgers, Mets, or Giants, because those areas are covered by this network. So today we're going to discuss the history of the Cincinnati Reds, and welcome all listeners. David, I know the Reds started they were one of the original teams in the National League.
The National League Reds folded.
Yeah, they folded after 1880, right?
After 1880. They ran into problems with the National League, which was very steeped in the Victorian age and did not want baseball on Sunday, and particularly did not want alcoholic beverages sold in their parks. But the Reds, even though they were only allowed to play National League games on Sunday, used their home park to loan it out to other teams, which would pay them to use the park, and alcoholic beverages were sold. And William Hulbert, who was then the president of the National League, said kaput to the Reds. And so the National League team, the original National League team, folded after the 80 season, and in 81, Cincinnati was without Major League Baseball. They had a lot of great amateur teams and semi-pro teams, but after the 81 season, a Cincinnati sports writer, O.P. Kaler, and several others were instrumental in forming a new rebel major league called the American Association. And one of the keynote teams to install was one in Cincinnati, and they also formed one in Philadelphia, which had also been kicked out of the National League. So those were the two teams they centered on those two teams in the first couple of years. When they also put a team in St. Louis, a team in Pittsburgh, which was called the Allegheny team, because it was based in a suburb really of Pittsburgh, Allegheny, and one in Louisville, and then they scrambled around to find a sixth team, because they had to have at least 6 teams to start the league, and they ended up at the last moment with Baltimore. And for a number of years, Baltimore really struggled because it got off way behind the 8 ball in the original season, 1882. But the Reds, who are now the National League Reds, can trace their ancestry all the way back to 1882.
What's really ironic is that when you look at the Reds media guides, there's a blank between 1880 and 1890 when they went to the National League.
Right.
I want to mention that David is the author of one of the seminal works on the 1880s American Association called the Beer and Whiskey League. And that the 4 teams, the Dodgers, the Cardinals, the Pirates, and the Reds, all the current franchises all originated in the American Association.
That's right.
So the American Association was a legitimate major league during the 10 years of its existence.
Yeah, when the Pittsburgh team left after the 1886 season, and the Cincinnati and Brooklyn teams left Brooklyn, which subsequently became the L.A. Dodgers, left after the 89 season. But the St. Louis team stuck around until the American Association folded after the 1891 season, and they were then embraced by the National League, which also took in Louisville, the team in Washington, and the Baltimore club. And they then became part of the 12-team National League and American Association, which was the official title of the league until it became an 8-team league after the 1899 season.
And Cincinnati was in that first attempt of the Boyd World Series in 1882.
Yep, exactly. They actually got 2 games in against the National League champion Chicago White Stockings, and split the 2 games. And at that point, the American Association president Denny McKnight said, "No mas. We're not playing those guys." And the National League was not happy with Cap Anson's Chicago team playing against Cincinnati either. So they disbanded postseason play until after the 1884 season, when Providence accepted a challenge from the New York Mets, who won the pennant in the American Association. And that really is the first official World Series in Major League history.
Yeah, the thing is that when the Reds, after that, Cincinnati didn't do very well, for most of the rest of the time in the AA and in when they were in the 12th Team National League.
That's right. They won their only pennant in the 19th century, Major League pennant, the 1869 team, which preceded Major League Baseball, stomped everybody in sight all across the country. But the only Major League pennant they won was in 1882 on the American Association. They contended in 1883. They still had good teams in 84, 85, and 86. Then they started to stumble around a bit, and they joined the National League and had a pretty good team in 1890. But and throughout the 90s, they were usually over 500. And in 96, they were actually in the pennant race fairly deep into the season. But they didn't break through again until the infamous season of 1919.
Did you think that they were hurt by the whole situation with John Brush, who owned them and then wound up buying into the Giants? And I think he had interest in both teams for a while.
He did, and the Cincinnati had a pretty good team, and Brush got some good ball players, but when he lost, he realized that the future was for him was in with the National League New York franchise. It was going to be a bigger moneymaker, bigger attendance, and much more fame and glory for him in the long run. So he abandoned his interest in Cincinnati, but not until trading one Amos Russi to the New York Giants for one Christy Mathewson, which was probably the most infamous trade.
No, he got it backwards. He traded Mathewson to the Giants.
Right. He traded Mathewson to the Giants from Cincinnati.
Yeah,
and
for Amos Russi, who was done by then.
Done by that, and then he moved to the Giants and had the benefits of having Mathewson with him.
Yeah, the Reds team during the dead ball era up until 1919 were probably in the middle of the pack somewhere.
They were, yeah. They had a few good seasons, but for the most part, they didn't finish last.
No,
but they never really were a major contender either until they broke in 19.
They came out of really came out of nowhere in 1919. Of course, they beat the Black Sox in that infamous 1919 World Series, and there were a number of the Reds players that said, especially Ed Roush, said that they would have beaten the White Sox straight up had the games been on the level.
It's possible because they still had good teams in the early 20s. They gave the Giants pretty stiff competition a couple of years. It wasn't until really the middle 30s that they started to fall apart, and they really sank to the nether regions of the National League. And then when they hired Bill McKechnie as their manager
and Larry McPhail to run it.
And Mary McPhail to run it, and
yeah,
they picked up some good players in trades. They picked up a couple from the minor leagues, and in 39 and 40, they won pennants.
and they won the World Series for in 1940, being a pretty good Tiger team. And they had the two top pitchers were Paul Derringer and Bucky Walters, both of whom were acquired in trades. I think Derringer came from the Cardinals, where he had one season where he was 7-27 there, and Walters came from the Phillies, who at that point were anytime they had a player that was halfway decent, would get rid of them because they needed the money for operating expenses.
Nobody really saw much in Walters because he began as a third baseman and didn't. But once he converted to the mound, he became one of the top pitchers in the National League. He really was a lot like, the National League version of Bob Lemon.
Lemon. And they had the two of the better players were Frank McCormick and Harry Lombardi.
They had a good team, but for a long time, they were the only team to win back-to-back pennants and not have a player make the Hall of Fame. The only team besides the 1889-1890 Brooklyn Bridegrooms.
Yeah.
And the Bridegrooms still suffer that stigma.
Yeah, well, Lombardi, made the Hall of Fame later on. He was, as a lot of people know, he was a tremendous hitter with tremendous line drive hitter, and he was possibly the slowest player to play in the major leagues.
Yeah, exactly. And he even though he won 2 batting titles, he would have probably won even more had infielders not played him so deep, because they cut off a lot of hits.
Now they would be shifting like crazy on somebody like that.
Exactly.
And then after the war, they really fell into the doldrums with basically colorless teams throughout the 40s. I mean, in the 40s, the only one that they had that even, besides, I have to remember the Johnny Vandermeer double no hits in 1938. The only one that they had in the 40s that even approached any sort of celebrity was Ewell Blackwell, who in 1947 was, I think, 22-8, and most right-handed hitters at the time regarded him as the toughest pitcher they ever had to hit against because he was a sidearmer. They called him the Whip.
Yeah.
But
he was their only pitcher, and they did start to acquire some bats. Pazuzu was a big addition. They signed him and brought him up to their chain.
But he wasn't really, he didn't really come into his own until 1952.
Yeah, but he
had Hank Sauer, who they gave away to the Cubs with Frankie Baumholtz in 1949 for over the hill Harry Walker and single set named Peanuts Lowry. They had Hank Sauer through all those years too. And Blackwell hurt his arm in 48. Had a couple of decent years in 50 and 51, and then he just fell off the wagon very, very quickly.
Yeah.
But in the 50s, they started to bring in power hitters, and they started getting people. Gabe Paul running the team, and Brady Tebbets is the manager, and they brought in teams that had a lot of power and very little pitching. They had Gus Bell, who they stole from the Pirates for 3 nondescript players, Wally Post, who had a couple of decent years, and then in the infield they had a double play combination of Roy McMillan and Johnny Temple, who added a lot, and they in 1956 they managed to finish third, only 2 games behind the winning Dodgers. And the only starting pitcher they had that was really any good in those years was Brooks Lawrence.
Yeah, they were a very strong hitting team, and probably over when you consider the 50s in its entirety, they may have, except for the Dodgers and the Yankees, they may have been the strongest hitting club of the 50s, all in all. But
they had those uniforms with the sleeves cut off, and Kozuski, was sleeveless because his arms were so thick that they bulged through he could wear normal uniforms. And he had 4 really great years from 1953 to 1956 until, back problems robbed him of all his power.
Yeah.
He made the rounds after that. Yeah.
He did, but he still had something left because he came to the White Sox in '59 and was terrifically instrumental in their breakthrough, winning their first pennant.
Yeah, and then
Sox.
They fell off a little bit, and then they came out of a 6th place finish in 1960 to win the National League pennant in 1961.
Which was a big surprise to everyone.
Yeah, Jim Brosnan, who was one of their relief pitchers, became an author, and he published 2 books on the 1959 season called Pennant Race, what the hell is the name of that book?
Yeah, I remember. Wasn't Ball 4. No, that's Hilton's book.
The 1961 season was called Panic Race. And the 1959 book was the first diary, seasonal diary by a ball player that I can ever remember being published.
And it was a very good book.
Yeah.
It really stuck to baseball. It was not only a fun read, but educational. I remember reading it, and thinking, wow, this is a guy who has really a lot to say.
Yeah, and it made him believe he was, really mediocre when they got him, and the writing of the books apparently provided some sort of an outlet that he became a much better pitcher. I was one of their, the stalwart relief pitchers during his time there. And the 61 team had, Frank Robinson, who won the Most Valuable Player Award in the National League that year, and who was one of the truly great, underrated players, in my opinion, of all time. And they had David Pinson in center field, and they had the power, and of course, unfortunately, they went up against the 1961 Yankees in the World Series and wound up losing in 5 games.
Yeah. It's interestingly, Brosnan was not only a terrific writer, but he was from Cincinnati. He was actually born in Cincinnati. And after he wrote The Long Season, he did other books, and he was really a voice for baseball for a number of years, even after he retired. And
The Long Season was the name of the book.
The Long Season.
Yeah, it just came to me. And then in 1963, after a pretty good 3rd place finish in 1962, in 1963 they brought in this rookie who would be the face of the franchise basically for the next 16 seasons. That was Pete Rose.
Yeah, Pete Rose.
And, unfortunately, it tarnished his whole reputation by his gambling, even though, as a baseball player just by himself, he was really, really brilliant at the game. And they were contending most of the time in the 60s. They were pretty good most of the time in the 60s. When they got to the 70s, in 1970, they won the National League pennant and lost to the Orioles in that World Series in 5 games, and that was the start of the Big Red Machine. Of course, in 1966, they hurt themselves badly by trading Frank Robinson to the Orioles, essentially for Milt Pappas. It turned out to be one of the worst trades in Major League history. And in 70, they won, and after a bad year in 71, which went down the tubes when Bobby Tolan ripped his Achilles tendon in spring training and missed the entire season. They came back in 1972 and won the pennant, and
they got beat in the series again
by the A's. Yeah, the Hares versus Squares World Series when the Reds at that time had a policy of no facial hair. And they also had traded Lee May, sort of others, to the Astros for Joe Morgan and sort of others, and then the big red machine started. And it came to a real fruition in 75 and 76, where several people think that this was one of the best teams in baseball history.
It was.
Yeah, they beat the Red Sox in 1976 and in the 1975, and the 1976 season, they went through the League Championship Series over the Phillies in 3 straight, and then they beat the Yankees 4 straight in the World Series that season.
And winning back-to-back World Series, they were the first National League team to do it, I believe, since World War II.
No, the first one since the 1921 and 22 Giants to do
What
that.
about the
Cardinals? No, Cardinals lost in 43.
Oh, 43. That's right. They did.
Yeah,
okay.
they won in 44.
Well, that's even
44. Yeah, and
that I think that 75-76 team is probably maybe the best overall team, except for their pitching wasn't really that strong.
No.
But their overall lineup, I think, was one of the best I've seen in a long time.
Oh yeah, I mean they had Bench and Rose and Perez and George Foster, Ken Griffey Sr., Geronimo, and David Concepcion, and Joe Morgan, who
they were solid at every position.
And Joe Morgan won the MVP in each of those 2 years, in 1975 and 1976. And
their manager was none other than Sparky Anderson, who had 1 year of Major League ball.
So he had 218 for the 1959 Phillies.
And after his 75-76 season, the Reds, still were a good team in 77, 78, but nevertheless, they said goodbye to Sparky. They gave him
and they let Rose, leave as a free agent after 78. They won the division in 1979, and the Pirates beat them in 3 straight for the National League championship.
Yeah,
they went on to win that World Series. But from that machine team, Sparky Anderson made the Hall of Fame, and so did Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, and Tony Perez. Had Rose not gotten himself involved with gamblers, he would have been in from that team also.
It's still a possibility that he will get in one day, I think.
We can go into a whole discussion about him, but my feeling is that he was his own worst enemy.
He certainly was. Yeah, the gambling really.
And I look upon it as a tragedy, but the self-inflicted tragedy. So after that, they got they wound up getting Tom Seaver in 1977 from the Mets, and he had several good years. They would have won in 1981 if they didn't have that split season nonsense. Because of the strike that year, they would have won the National League West that season. But since they had this split season business and they gave it to the teams with the best record.
Well, the Reds had, and interestingly, the Reds had the best overall record in the National League that year. They didn't even make the playoffs.
No. And then they were pretty respectable. And then finally in 1990, there's another team that basically came out of nowhere. With Barry Larkin, who's a Hall of Famer, and the bullpen that they had called the Nasty Boys. They won the National League pennant, and then had an amazing sweep over the Oakland A's in the 1990 World Series.
Yeah, that to me was the most amazing sweep since the 54.
Since the Giants, since 1954.
When the Giants, beat the Cleveland Indians. Well, and then of course when the Dodgers, swept the Yankees, and that was something too. But
basically, since then, they've had some good teams. They made the wild card as recently as 2013 where they lost to the Pirates. But basically, in the last few years, they've considered themselves a small market team and got into the whole business of basically unloading every player who is halfway decent, except for Joey Votto, who they have signed to a very long-term contract. And Votto has been, he had a tremendous half of the season last year. Has been one of the best players in the National League for a while. But the way the management has operated the team, it's been very, very hard to make them competitive in the last couple of years. And it's a very nice ballpark, the GAB, as they call it, the Great American Ballpark. And the fans there are very, very supportive when the team is competitive.
Yeah, they've always had good fans. See, they had good fans in the 1880s. They
draw from Indiana and they draw from Kentucky. And they're basically, a regional franchise operating out of southwestern Ohio. And, they're one of the 8 original teams in the National League, and they've had an up and down history that, is true for almost all teams. And they've been interesting to follow. And outside of the era in the 70s of the big red machine, they really haven't had that many periods of sustainable success.
Well, that 39-40 team, if the war hadn't come along and that team had remained intact, I think it would have been good for another 4 or 5 years. They were a pretty strong team. And they even in the 80s, after they won their pennant in 82, they remained a pretty solid club. Through the 80s,
Now they were all won by the St. Louis.
Yeah, the Browns pretty much took over the American Association, and swept 4 straight pennants, and came very close to winning a 5th straight pennant in 1889. And at that point, the Cincinnati really wanted out of the association, and and packed their bags, moved over along with Brooklyn, and the American Association still staggered on though, and they even put another team, another major league team, which is forgotten, in Cincinnati in 1891. The Cincinnati Kelly Killers began the 91 season as the 8th team in the league. They were the last team to join after the Players League collapsed, and their manager was Mike King Kelly, and so the club was named after him. I don't know if there's another Major League Baseball club that was ever named after one of its players or its manager.
Now, the only one I can think in A sport is the Cleveland football team was named the Cleveland Browns after Paul Brown. That's the only one I can think of.
Yeah, that's the only one I can think of too. And Brown actually did not want the club to be named the Browns, but eventually succumbed and gave in. And few even in Cleveland remember anymore that the franchise, what it was like when he was the coach. But it was a terrific franchise. And Paul Brown then escaped once he was fired by Cleveland. I say escaped because he was really angry at Cleveland and wanted out by that time. And he escaped to Cincinnati and formed the Cincinnati Bengals, which have been the counterpart of the Reds, and the sustaining Cincinnati Major League sports.
They also had one of the things that's always interested me is the syndication in the National League of during the 1890s, where they had Brush with the Giants, Reds. They had Van Horst with the Brooklyn and Baltimore. The Robeson brothers with Cleveland and St. Louis, and the Barney Dreyfuss with Louisville and Pittsburgh.
Yeah, Brush really didn't have a part in any other team but the Reds until the turn of the century. In '99, the Reds were still pretty much his only team.
And one of the things I remember reading is that when Van Johnson formed the Western Association, which eventually became the American League, they had a team in Indianapolis, and they were affiliated with the Reds, and the Reds used to send players back and forth
it really
to
was,
Indianapolis and back, and it disrupted the Indianapolis franchise quite a bit.
Yeah, tremendously.
And I think that's one of the reasons that Van Johnson became determined to make his league into a major league, which of course he succeeded in.
Yeah. Few people, even few baseball historians, are aware that the minor league system really started, and Brush was probably more instrumental than anyone else in starting, a parent club over a minor league team with the Reds and the Indianapolis club, and he was actually cruel to that club, and he was from Indianapolis, which is the irony of it all. And he really did in that what was a very good team. It didn't win nearly as much as it should because its better players were constantly being moved up and down between Cincinnati and Indianapolis.
Yeah, so this is like the Steinbrenner shuttle, or like every team nowadays has, where they shuttle players who have options back and forth. Innumerable amount of times during the seasons in the last few years. Anyway, I think that we've covered the bases on this. I hope anybody who listens to this finds it enjoyable. We'll try to do some more of these if the reception is very good. And I want to thank David, who's been a terrific friend and mentor for the last 25 years. For helping me out doing this podcast. I want to thank Ralph Tycho for giving me the opportunity to do one on my own.
So I want to thank Al, because Al and I have been good friends and colleagues and also rivals across the trivia tables over the years.
That was a long time ago.
We've had some fierce contests.
That was a long time ago.
No.
So, I want to thank you for listening when you do listen to this, and hope you acquire some knowledge for it. Thank you, David. Thank
you, Al.
Next week.
My pleasure.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.